True ghost stories that made me believe in the paranormal. Two houses on one property. We moved in on one of them when I was 8 to 10 years old at the request of the property owner to keep an eye on the property as he lived about 8 hours away. This was in the early 1980s. Almost immediately, my parents, siblings, and I began to see an apparition standing on the back porch of the other house. It was blue in the shape of a woman wearing a big dress and holding an open umbrella over her head. No features were visible, just the shape. It was not visible all day, but it was visible at various times every day. It was not just us that could see it. Any visitor we would have could also see the apparition. Some of my dad's friends would come over and, along with my dad, stand in our yard just staring at it. We lived there for 2 years, and I could type all day about the experiences we had. We were given a key to the other house, and my mom would go across the yard to use the phone in the kitchen and call my dad at work on his lunch break. She would demand that I go with her due to her fear. The key was to the back door, which was accessible by the back porch. When you entered the back door, you found yourself in the kitchen. Now, if the apparition was visible, Dad did not get a phone call. As soon as you walked into the house, it was as if you were walking through water up to your neck. The air was just thick and heavy. I remember one instance when she was sitting in the kitchen on the phone, and I was seated at the kitchen table scared out of my mind. There was a dish drainer next to the sink with silverware and a platter of 2 on it. It started rattling like someone was shaking it. We both ran out of there. Another time, we were in the kitchen and a door deeper in the house began to slam over and over really fast. Bam, 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 bam. It too instigated quick egress. In one of the bedrooms, there was an old dresser in which each dresser had these metal loops on each end. One day, those began shaking violently and rattling so loudly we could hear it in the kitchen. I once went to grab a glass that was on the counter to get a drink of water from the sink. I was not able to get it. It slid away from my hand down the length of the counter and fell into the sink, breaking. Another time, I had to use the restroom while my mother was on the phone. I walked down the hallway. As I did, I could hear voices. 2 men and women talking. The closer I got to the bathroom, the louder it got. As I opened the door and flipped on the light, I saw something that I can see now just as vividly as then, almost 40 years later. Standing in the huge bathtub was a woman, wearing a big dress like what was worn in the 1920s. She was holding an open umbrella above her. Standing on either side were 2 men. The men were wearing overalls, white with thin blue stripes and matching caps. They immediately stopped talking and all 3 looked at me with anger. I screamed, ran back to the hall past my mom, out of the kitchen and never touched the back porch. My mom was right behind me, not knowing why I ran, but assuming the situation dictated evacuation. One time I was heading to the bathroom. My mom would not let me leave her alone inside, and as soon as I got to the head of the hallway, every door to every room in the hallway slammed shut. I decided to hold my pee. One winter, my parents brought a heavy blanket over to our house from the other house. The owner had said we could borrow anything from the house. That same day, we began having experiences in our home. The TV would come on. This was the days of the big console TVs with the big click knobs. It might be at 2 a.m. or it might be at 2 p.m. You would hear a pop and then the TV was on. All of us might be in the living room watching MASH after the 9 p.m. news and the toilet in the bathroom would flush. I saw my dad lean over the bed one night to remove a book that my mom had been reading in the bed. The book was open and laying page down in the middle of the bed. As soon as his hand got close to the book jumped away about a foot, similar to the glass experience I had. He then had to put a knee on the bed so he could stretch further. The book jumped once more, this time falling off onto the floor. By this time, he was laying on the bed and reached onto the floor and was able to grab the book. He carried it to the back door and flung it out into the yard. My dad would take friends from work and they would walk around inside the other house together to see what area would make the hair on their arms stand up the most. Again, 2 years of experience living there, almost daily experiences. My dad found an old photo album one day, and we were all in the kitchen flipping through it. About halfway in, I saw a picture that made my blood freeze. The same three people I have seen in the bathroom were depicted in a photograph standing in the rail yard in town in what looked like the early 1900s. The woman, I come to learn, was married to one of the train engineers who was standing next to her. The other man was the husband's friend, also a train engineer. The house we were in was the home of the husband and wife. That day in the hallway, as I proceed towards the bathroom, I could hear their conversation. One of the men wanted to leave, and the other man, along with the woman, was adamant against leaving. Then I walked in and interrupted this conversation. Shortly after finding the photo album, we moved. I suppose my father had had enough of his family being terrified, being woken up in the middle of the night by blankets getting yanked off you, doors slamming and lights going on and off, TVs coming on, and waking up to apparitions standing next to the bed. The foot of the bed, or even just blobs floating around the room like a dark mist. Several years later, I joined the military and left. After being gone from the state for almost 20 years, I moved back to the area with my wife and kids. I started a delivery company and one day had a job on the same road as that house. Oh, the emotions that surged through me as I drove by. I expected to see the house crumbled or maybe see the woods and brush had taken over the place, as it's very rural. Much to my surprise, people are living there. I made my delivery and on the way back pulled into the yard. The same yard that almost 40 years prior I played in under the watchful eye of the Blue Lady. A woman about my age and younger woman who appeared in her mid-20s stepped out into the yard to see what I wanted. I made up some BS story about being from the area, moving away then back, and was looking to write a book about the area and its history. I mentioned that I have lived on the property when I was a kid. I asked them if they had any experiences in the house. The women looked surprised that the younger woman looked scared. They confirmed that in the 4 or 5 years living there, they have experienced some puzzling things. Pictures removed from the walls, doors slamming and such. But it had been a while since anything had happened. I learned that the original family of the place finally sold it after all the elderly ones passed. The first buyer had barely closed on it and moved in before she decided that nope, she's no longer found it appealing. She moved post-haste. Then the other people I was talking to bought it. No, they did not believe in ghosts. No, they could not explain how family pictures would be on their living room wall when going to bed and on the kitchen floor in the morning. Midnight Monster here. That was the first story of today's series of true ghost stories that made me believe in the paranormal. If this is the kind of thing you're into, make sure you subscribe to the channel and know Midnight Monster drops daily videos. But now, we will proceed to story 2. I have a story. So, in high school, I worked kids' birthday parties. The place was a giant gym and gymnastics dance classes were also held there. One day, I came in and one of the girls I worked with, who was very spiritual and religious, was freaked out. During the gymnastics class she taught that morning, one of the kids was staring up at the ceiling. When she asked the kid what he was doing, he said, "There's a little boy up there," and pointed at the ceiling. Strange enough, but whatever, kids are weird. Later, 2 girls who were working a birthday party before mine came out of the gym and were visibly shaken. A pair of 5-year-old twins went down a slide and then stared at the ceiling. They both said that there was a little boy up there, in the same spot on the ceiling that the kid from the morning gymnastics class was. We all went in and inspected the ceiling. Of course, it was just a regular gray warehousey ceiling, but we were all super freaked out after that point. During my party, I was pushing a little boy on the giant swing we had in the gym. He too began staring at the ceiling. He said directly to my face, "Hey, there's a little boy up there." We told all of our coworkers and managers about the 3 separate experiences we had today with children from different parties and classes seeing a little boy on the ceiling. The next day, we had downtime between parties and nobody was in the gym. There are cameras in the gym that allow parents to see their children playing from the lobby. My manager called us out of the break room, Get guys, check this out. We came out and saw the screen, which is streaming from the gym, showing that giant swing going back and forth, but nobody's there. It's just the swing going. I like to think that the ghost was truly a little boy who just wanted to play, and he finally got to go on that swing. Could be worse. I did have a strange experience. I had a cat who I found in a ditch many years ago. She was cute and I pet her, so she followed me back down the train tracks about a mile to my home. I opened the door for her and she went in. She was offered the opportunity to go back out and did for a moment, but then she came back. She was mine forever. I've had many pets over the years and I love them all, but this one was different. She wanted to be near me all the time. I'd often said that I never had a cat who made me feel like my personal space was being violated before. She followed me up to bed every night and purred me to sleep. She died fairly quickly. I barely even had the chance to say goodbye. I knew she was ill, having been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, which cat owners will know it's not a good thing to hear, although progress has been made. Ask your vet about the pens. They vomit their food up and waste slowly away, eventually succumbing to their own congestive heart failure or kidney damage. She had taken a turn for the worse and I thought her treatment wasn't working. On examination, they found tumors in her stomach and liver. She had been dealt a mortal blow and was only going to suffer hard and harder. And the most painful one I've ever had to deal with, I put her down, and she meowed one last time before the end. I forgot to mention that this cat was also the most talkative I've ever had. She frankly just would not shut up. I buried her in the backyard to keep her close and tried to get some sleep, completely beside myself with grief. As I lay down, I heard something familiar. I live in an old house and my bedroom does not have a door, so I installed one of those plastic sliding doors. The slats it's made of make a telltale clicking sign when they're disturbed, like they did when a cat pushes in between them and the doorframe. I heard this, and a moment later I felt the foot of my bed compress and could feel the mattress deform around my feet. Up beside my legs and roughly to my hips, I looked. No cat. I don't know how to explain this. I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm sure grief can cause some pretty significant psychological disturbances. A quick look of my post history will very quickly show I am anything but cuddly. But I was absolutely in the kind of deep grief where one would expect that, as I love that cat more than basically anything else. Even typing this now, years later, is making my eyes well up with the sadness for my lost friend. I could write off the sound of the plastic slats as a breeze or hallucination. Older members of my family said they saw my father after he died, and I've read about grief-induced hallucinations before. But to feel my mattress deform like that, in exactly the way she used to circle my feet and come up beside me, I don't know what to think. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you there's no such thing as ghosts. Most things just people say. I think they're imagination or wishful thinking. Now, I don't know. I just don't know. When I was in my 20s and newly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live pretty quickly. We lucked into the perfect house. It was old. In its previous life, it had been someone's beach cottage, which I loved. What's better than living in a resort town close enough to walk to the beach? Plus, it wasn't in a resort area. It was on the back half of someone's property with one road in and out and lots of trees and shade, very quiet and no other people around. Because the house was originally a weekend cottage, it was one big room with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and a bath, and another addition of the back that had a bedroom. The big room was awesome. All windows on 3 sides with a nice breeze most of the time, a fireplace and lots of open areas. The only thing that kinda pinged my radar was the landlord. When we rented, he was overly insistent that we sign a year lease and we could not break it for any reason. No matter what, we needed to pay out the lease, whether we lived in the house or not. I thought that was a little weird the way he kept repeating that over and over, because he wanted to make sure that we understood, but it just did not register at the time. Other than I was a bit worried that maybe there was troublemakers or noisy partiers on the beach or something, he assured us that it was very quiet neighborhood, but he repeated that we could not break the lace. I worked a 9 to 5 job. My spouse worked 12 hours on and 12 hours off shifts. So, there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or two were fine. I liked the house. I liked the neighborhood. I liked the beach. I'm mostly a homebody, so when the spouse was at work, I would stay at home reading or watching the little TV or cooking. I'd always wanted to learn how to knit, so I bought some yarn and started teaching myself. Then, sometime around the 3rd month, I started to get very strong feelings that someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. You know, like looking over my shoulder. It only happened when I was alone in the house and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking about it too much, I started sitting in places where my back was to the wall or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house. I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace, just out of the corner of my eye. I thought I needed to stop dreaming so much, but I started to stay in the bedroom after dark with the door shut. Things started not being where I put them in the big room. I kinda got irritated with my spouse for messing with my stuff. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes after almost every day looking for my handbag or my car keys. The one day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped up and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. I don't mean just a little bit, I mean the yarn was strung between couches wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that the spouse was playing a trick on me and I cleaned it up. Then I decided that I would not mention it to him, just see how long it took him to clean. He never did. I moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend. I'd gushed so much about our lovely beach house that she came to visit and see the beach. She came for a 4-day weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room. After the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable, and she thought she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangement, and she was leaving that afternoon. She seemed agitated, but she would not talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called me. She started the conversation with, "I know you don't believe in ghosts, and maybe I'm just being stupid." My heart dropped. I thought I was the only one, and I was being so stoic and pretending I never saw or heard anything. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up in the middle of the night. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then, while she was sitting in the bed looking around, the windows started opening and closing. It just kind of went around the room. One window opened, one closed. Then one to the next, then the next, and the next. Then she heard footsteps walking straight towards her, but no one was there. The footsteps walked right to the bedside where she was sitting, then over the bed, continued across the room and out through the side door in the kitchen area. She said she ran out to the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made an excuse to go home. She did not want to spend another night in that house. She said, "I know you won't believe me, that's okay, but I'm never ever sleeping in your house again." I told myself that my sister had always been a little nutty about stuff like that, so knowing the house was old, she probably just had a very vivid dream. I kept telling myself that. A few weeks after that, just when I had stopped jumping at every stray noise, I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast for me and my spouse. And y'all, I don't know how to explain this. I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out to start cooking. All the dishes were rearranged. Not messy, not tumbled about. They were all very neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally held glasses now had plates stacked on them. The shelves that normally had bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought was that someone had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks. Still locked. We did not know many people, and I couldn't think of anyone who would pull a trick like that. Besides, there was so much stuff moved that no one could do it quietly without disturbing people sleeping in practically the next room. So, I did what any half-crazed, scared, shitless person would do. I pretended it never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf, and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I sure as hell wasn't moving anything back because I did not want to see what would happen if I did. I cooked breakfast, I went on with my day, and later that afternoon I told my spouse that I was not comfortable in this house anymore. Could we find somewhere else to live? Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that was probably a good idea and let's find something quick. And we moved out. We called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys. He never, not once, asked why we were moving. He never met our eyes, just kept looking at the ground. We agreed to keep paying rent until he could find some new tenants. Months later, I asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house. He said, "Yeah, that wasn't a good house. Glad we moved." And we never talked about it again. I lived in a haunted house for basically all my life. It used to scare the heck out of me when I was little, but I just got desensitized to it. We always experienced hearing footsteps, voices upstairs when everyone else was downstairs. Dogs that follow nothing around the room, typical ghost stuff. Some of the stranger experiences include my grandma seeing her mother in her room at night. My mom saw a ball of light floating in our hallway. My brother and I separately heard fingernails tapping on the walls of our bedroom. And when we called our mom to listen, the sounds would stop. Then as soon as mom left, it would start again. We experienced this at different times, my brother for a week or so and then me. And without knowing what the other one was having the same experience, I had a desk toy in my room that had a little foam ball hanging from a chain on it. My cousin and I were playing video games and the ball randomly bounced like someone had tapped it from below. The kicker was when my mom started feeling like something was climbing into the bed with her. She describes it like a dog trying but failing to climb up to the foot of the bed. She thought it was my dad moving his feet, but then she felt it wasn't there, and she was wide awake, so she knew it wasn't him. She kept this story to herself, and then a few days later, my uncle stayed the night in the guest room and described feeling the same thing. At that point, my mom waited for a day that everyone was out of the house. She opened up the windows and told the spirit that it either had to leave and move on, or it wasn't allowed to bother us anymore. Since then, we've gone from activity every day to on and off experiences every few months. We've been told by several people who have slept in the guest room and had nightmares about it that there's a portal into the closet of our guest room. Sometimes I think that spirits just pass through occasionally and cause a flurry of activity. I'll start with the portal in the closet. I have never experienced that, and I have slept like a baby in that room a couple of times. Never had any weird experiences, so I don't know about that one. For a while, I lived in a dorm that was rumored to be haunted. The only experience of note that I had other than just spooky feelings was one night, I came out of my room to go to the bathroom, and as I rounded the corner to go to the bathroom, a shadow, about 4 feet tall, came out the room and vanished right before it went through me. I was about 18 at the time, and despite living in a haunted house for my whole life, it was my first time seeing anything with my own eyes. I wasn't really scared, more surprised, which defines most of my paranormal experiences. My father owns 2 branches of a business, and one of them is a building that is over 100 years old. Since we've got the place, we've had employees tell us stories about odd experiences in the store. Everything from products flying off the shelves to seeing shadows where they can't be any. One driver, in particular, was in the back of the store and saw a shadow in the shape of a person standing at the top of a set of steps. He backed down into the front room and was super pale. He told my dad what happened and he never went back into that room again. He quit not long after because, well, he was afraid. In that same building, my dad and I were changing out the lights one day when the store closed. I believe it was Memorial Day a few years back. We were the only people there, and we are 100% positive about that. My dad was up on a scissor lift 15 feet up, changing lights, and I was running back and forth one of the back rooms flipping breakers so he did not get electrocuted. There were 3 shelves that I saw on my way in and out each time, 2 super tall shelves with one about 4 feet in between them. One time, as I came out of the back room, I saw a man standing on the other side of the shorter shelf. He was looking right at me. He was wearing a hat and had a mustache. I would have guessed the style from the 1920s. At first, I thought it was my dad. He is a mustached, and it was the only logical explanation my brain could come up with. But as I rounded the corner, he was still 15 feet up on that scissor lift. Not scary to me at all, but super fascinating. My grandma used to hear kids running around her apartment long after all her grandkids were growing up. The meat shop below her apartment hears it too. My cousin, 15 at the time, was at his house not long after his grandpa died. He and his family were playing video games, and they looked behind them and saw a shadow, generally in the shape of with the posture of his grandpa, standing right there behind him. Both kids screamed and it vanished. They ran downstairs to tell his mom, who did not believe them because my cousin is known for telling tall tales. My cousin then burst into tears saying, "I think it was Grandpa." My cousin is not a crier and certainly would never cry in front of his friends. So at that point, my aunt believed him. The next day, she went upstairs and did what my mom did in my house, asking it to leave. And as far as I know, they have not had any experiences since. Finally, the last time I went ghost hunting, I had one of the most up-close experiences I've ever had. We were taking a ghost tour of the old Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. I was going up against some steps immediately after the tour guide, who was the only person in front of me. As I came up the steps, I heard a voice in my ear say, "Hey, he's bringing a lot of people up here." It sounded like it came from inches away. Again, I wasn't scared, just totally fascinated. I love this shit. There have been several experiences in my life, and I have personally seen some kind of blue translucent figure in my room. When I was younger, and my mom claims to have seen a young girl in her room at night once. The biggest experience, though, and the only one that really converted me, involved my youngest brother. My brother is 13 years younger than me, and growing up, he'd often play in his room. I and my mom would often hear him talking to somebody, as if he was playing with them. Things like peekaboo, playing with his toys, etc. We thought nothing of it, and it was just like an imaginary friend or something. This went on for a few years. When he was around 5 years old, he's 12 now, he got a PlayStation and started playing video games a lot more, as well as spending more time with his friends he'd met in high school. One night, while he's playing his game, I and my mom hear him screaming from his bedroom and we rush upstairs. My brother dropped the controller with the game unpaused, something he never did, and he was on the bed he had been sitting on, and it was as if he was trying to drag himself away from something at the bottom of the bed. He was screaming, "Get it off me! Get it off me! And I don't want to play with you anymore!" While frantically trying to get away from something, but the creepiness did not end there because his legs were in the air awkwardly, as if something had a hold of him and was dragging him back down the bed. My mom ran over and grabbed him, carried him downstairs, and called my granddad over to just reassure us. We haven't had any experiences since that. Like I said, he's 12 now and this was 7 years ago. He still remembers it happening, but he refuses to talk about it. And if it is mentioned, though, we don't make a habit of it, of course. He gets very scared and has nightmares that night. It doesn't matter what else I or Mom has seen. Nothing comes close to that experience. I was always on the fence about ghosts because there was no scientific evidence of them being real, and I was going through a big question phase with religion, afterlife at the time anyways. But my family moved into an old farmhouse when I was 12. This was a very old farmhouse with a built date around the Civil War. The original owner's name was still on the old barn out back, and we found numerous old antiques built into the walls when we completely renovated the place. A few odds and end things that happened after we first moved in, but distinct things started happening to me after I turned 16, but never to my sister until she turned 16 too. The most prominent memory I have, the upstairs consisted of 2 bedrooms. One bedroom was the room at the top of the stairs. The second bedroom was in a separate room just to the left of the top of the stairs. I had the private room, and my sister's room was the landing. When someone walked up the stairs, it was very distinct. You could hear each step and creak get louder as the person approached got closer. So, one night, I'm sitting on my bed watching TV or something, and I hear my sister come up the stairs and go lay on her bed, so I start talking to her. When she doesn't answer me, I get annoyed, go into her room, and figure out what her problem is. Only, she's not in there. My mind was blown because I know I heard her. I call for her, and she had been downstairs the entire time. We never felt threatened, but it did seem that this entity liked picking only on women. Even my mother, who doesn't believe in ghosts, had to admit some odd things had happened. I think the funniest thing was having my ponytail pulled while I was doing the dishes. I don't know why it was so funny, it just cracked me up that whatever it was felt like playing with my hair. That was 8 stories from Midnight Monster of true ghost stories that made me believe in the paranormal. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead and subscribe, as there's going to be daily videos here on Midnight Monster covering a plethora of topics.